Whatever I'm doing, I'm always kind of weaving in what difference are you making? What impact are you having? How is, are you thinking about your influence as a leader on others? Are you thinking about that on a daily basis?
Welcome to Making Change with Your Money, a podcast that highlights the stories and strategies of women who experienced a big life transition and overcame challenges as they redefined financial success for themselves. Now here's your host, certified financial planner, Laura Rotter.
I am so excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Jann Freed, a leadership development and management change consultant with the Genysys Group. A former professor, Dr. Jann is on a journey to retire the word retirement. She's published several books, including Leading with Wisdom, Sage Advice from 100 Experts, and her latest book, Breadcrumb Legacy, How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. Dr. Jann also hosts a podcast, Becoming a Sage podcast, where she interviews thought leaders on the wisdom of life and work. And she also writes the Leading Edge column for Training Magazine, which is published in print and online. So welcome, Jann, to the Making Change with Your Money podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
I'm honored you are my guest, and I'm going to start with the same question I start all my interviews with, which is, what was money like in your family growing up?
That's a great question. Well, I grew up in a very small town in Iowa, but my dad was the banker of 3 small towns. So the financial question is kind of interesting because I grew up in a farming community, but I didn't really grow up on a farm. And so my dad, as the banker, knew everybody and knew everybody's finances, kind of, okay? But I would say I grew up in a conservative family. I mean, it was like, even though he was the banker, he made it very clear that, money did not grow on trees and that we had to get part-time jobs in the summer. I mean, I always had a summer job. So I would say I grew up in a fiscally conservative family.
And did you have siblings?
One sister, she's 2 years younger, and she actually lives outside of Austin, Texas now. And I still live in Iowa. I live in Des Moines, the capital, but just one sister. I remember one time getting kind of, I don't like the word jealousy, or jealous, but I remember saying to my dad, I was probably in 5th grade, and I said, so-and-so got XYZ for Christmas. She got all these gifts, and we got gifts. But it wasn't quite what I wanted or wasn't what she had or something. I can't remember. And I remember my dad said, just remember what you got was paid for in cash. And don't always assume that what they got was paid for, it could have been on credit. So anyway, my dad was not very big on using credit, or if he did, he would, because he was a banker, he would never have wanted to pay any kind of interest.
And it's also, Jann, a great message that you never know how people are paying for things.
That's right.
And you can't.
And that was what he was trying to communicate, because he probably did know what some of these people, how they were buying stuff, but he's not going to tell me. But yeah, I think it was a good lesson learned.
So you've shared that you were from a fiscally conservative house. Did you just expect that you were going to go to college? Obviously, your dad was educated.
Well, that's interesting because he actually fell into banking. So he served in World War II and really didn't have a chance to go to college. And so he was really kind of a self-made businessman. And my mom worked in like a retail store. And so my mom was actually trained as a lab technician, but both of them never really had your traditional college experience or college degree. So nothing was more important to them than going to college. So education, grades, studying, all of that was very reinforced and stressed. And so it's kind of ironic. I never thought I'd be a college professor, but I love school. I love studying. I did well. And I just kept going to school, and I fell into college teaching. I wasn't planning on that. And then I loved it. So when I look back, it's kind of interesting because they really stressed education and that message got through. My sister has a master's in music therapy, and she actually helped create the program because she would have graduated. When would she have graduated? She would have graduated like in 1980. And then she created the program. There was no music therapy program at the University of Iowa, and she helped create it. So anyway, so I think it really is interesting how when you stress something and make people realize the value and how important it is, that it really does influence decisions you make and directions you go.
Yes. And as you know, Jann, it could influence either way. You could feel that the messages that you got from your parents were a positive influence, and you can choose that direction. Or you can say, oh, there is like no way I'm going to become.
Yeah, that's true. And some people do that. That's true. That's a good point.
And it's also interesting that your parents did not have the traditional college education. It was therefore so important for them that you did, because I actually interviewed someone where that was not the case, that the parents felt sort of jealous of the fact that she was able to have a traditional education and they were not. So it's a testament to your parents and how much they really wanted you to have, more choice.
And another message that wasn't quite so subtle, my dad said, and remember, if you get married during college, we will not pay for your college. Okay, fine. I mean, I wasn't even close to that, but yeah, no, that was another message, that you need to get that degree. So.
Oh, I like that message.
Yeah.
Which is tied to your ability to support yourself no matter what happens in your life. So what did you major in when you were in college, Jann?
So I did major in business management. And I think it was because, it's kind of what I knew. That's what my dad was doing, or, he was in business. And so I did end up majoring in business management, but I almost had I had a minor in Spanish, and then I almost had a minor in art. So creativity was always very important to me too. So, I took jewelry courses. And so anyway.
Yeah, both you and your sister sound like you have sort of a creative.
Yeah, there's a creative bent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And were either of your parents artistic or musical? Well,
my dad played the organ. He played the piano. He was probably, my mom sewed. I didn't have those skills, but she knew how to knit and crochet and sew. Now my sister got those skills. I got creative skills that are really more freelance, and hers are, my sister got the skills that are more kind of prescribed. You follow directions, So anyway, it's all very interesting. Those are good connections you're making.
So do you cook?
I do cook, but what's interesting is I've become a really pretty good cook, but I'm still not a very good baker. And I say, well, baking is a science and cooking is an art. And so, with cooking, you can have a splash here and a dash there. But with baking, you better follow directions. And I've had a lot of flops because, I either get in a hurry or I don't read it right, or, I make a mistake and it's like, well, that didn't turn out. So I think that's interesting too, don't you? I mean,
yes, it's in keeping with what you said, because it's very true. Baking, you have to follow. It's chemistry. It's science. You have to follow the ingredients. And cooking, which is why I asked, is much more creative.
Much more creative.
You can bring yourself to it.
Yeah, much more forgiving. Yeah.
So you majored in business, and what was your first job out of college? Like, what was your trajectory?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So I majored in business, and of course I got out of college in, the very late 70s, and the economy was not good. And there was one thing, I did not want to go into banking. Okay. Banking seemed very boring to me. So I interviewed, and out of the interviews I had, the best offer was from the largest bank in the state of Iowa. And it was to be on their management trainee program. And I really did not want banking. And so I started getting my MBA while I was working at the bank, because they had a tuition reimbursement program. And I was single and I was paying for this. So, and then once I got my MBA, I got a call saying, would you want to teach? And that led to I said, well, I've never thought about it. Why don't you think about it? So I applied and I got the job and then I loved it. So it is interesting how life works out, Laura.
So who called you? I'm curious, Jann. Like, where was the phone call from?
Now, so it was my alma mater. So that's where I had gone to college. And they said, well, we heard you're getting your MBA. And I said, yes. And they said, and I said, but I've never taken any education courses. Oh, you don't need education courses to be a teacher. No, you just have to have an MBA. And then if you like it, you're going to have to go on and get a PhD, which I did later. Yeah, a little bit later.
That's so interesting. So some of my career trajectory echoed yours. I graduated in early 80s and as an English lit major, which really was not going to get me very far. And then I decided to get my MBA, and I was in a credit training program at a small middle market bank, and they paid my tuition.
Oh, really? Okay.
But I quickly recognized that working as a lending officer in a small middle market bank, I was never going to earn a lot of money. So that was when I then, moved to Wall Street. Just seemed like a better way to, but nobody called me and asked me if I wanted to teach.
No, but at least you got to Wall Street. That's great.
It's just
no one invited me to Wall Street, so that's good.
But it's interesting, Jann, that they saw you as someone who had that skill set. I guess it was a small enough school or a small enough department.
Yeah, it was a small enough school, and I had really kind of excelled there. And so I feel lucky. I feel very lucky because I did love it. Now, again, I didn't make a lot of money, but I love the flexibility, and we have three grown children now. And I loved it. When I first started teaching, I thought, they don't even have to pay me. Now I was single. I'm like, they don't even have to pay me. I like this. I like this too much. They shouldn't pay me. I like it too much.
Jann, could you share with our listeners what are the skills that made you feel so comfortable in front of a classroom?
Oh, I think, well, first of all, I was only 4 years older than the seniors that I was teaching. Okay. So it was a little challenging at first, especially with male students. But I think the skill set is making presentations, and preparing for class is kind of like studying for class. And so, I was able to, very good at focusing and organizing and sharing my passion with topics that I was teaching marketing, and I was teaching organizational behavior. And I love kind of the study of people. And so I think it was just the passion and I love student life. I like being on campus.
That I can see. Keeps you young, though of course you were young.
But it does, but then after, I didn't plan to be there 30 years, but then 30 years later, it's like, oh gosh, I really am 30 years older than these students. Early on, it didn't make a difference. But then all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, gosh, this has been a long time. And students, I felt like I was staying the same age and they were all getting younger. It's kind of funny.
That's true. I'm curious how your role shifted over that time, and just as importantly, how the students shifted over that time.
Well, it's interesting because I've been asked this question several times about, do you think students were getting brighter or whatever, and I think some of the skills of students went downhill. And I'll tell you why, because before, home computers, laptops, before everybody had their own computer, we would edit and edit and edit before we would type our papers, because when we typed them, then they were done. And I would find that students would just type it in and sometimes not even read it, or expect spell check to do all their work, and I said, no, one of the biggest mistakes I made typing is form and from, or you're using the wrong, instead of TOO, TO, and spell check isn't going to catch that. You have to read it. And so I found that the writing skills, I felt, went down, except for the really, really good students. And then they're going to do what they have to do. But overall, it was kind of like, okay, I typed it in and I'm going to hand it in. And I'm like, or send it in or whatever. And I'm like, no, this is not good. This is not good. So I think students over time, I think it'd be tough to be teaching full time now because of the culture and cancel culture and what's going on with diversity And people have been empowered because of social media. I think everybody's very opinionated and they think they're right. And I think early on, I think respect has kind of gone down too. So I think early on, as a professor, people believe what you say. And I think towards the end of my career, it was kind of like, I'm going to challenge you because I read it on Facebook and I know it's true,
And how did your role change? Did you teach different subjects? How were you keeping yourself engaged?
I taught strategic management, principles of marketing, not all at the same year, but so I taught a variety of courses. But then towards the end of my career, I was awarded an endowed chair in leadership and character development. And that gave me more time to focus on leadership as a field. And so that was nice. And then, in the summers, I would do research and write articles, write books. 4 of my books are co-authored. Only the last 2 am I the sole author. But I was able to find traditional publishers for each book. Now, that doesn't seem to be so important these days. But for me in higher education, it was important.
Yeah. And I think it remains important relative to self-publishing. Did you always enjoy writing, Jann? I wouldn't traditionally think someone who says I majored in business would be a writer.
I did. With a liberal arts, even though I was a business management major, it wasn't a business college. So I was, in a liberal arts college. And so we had to take a variety of courses, and almost every course, major papers, major research papers. And I loved it. I loved that. So it is interesting. I didn't love it and think, oh, I want to be a college professor, but I loved that. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So can you describe how you came to the point where you realized you no longer wanted to be teaching full time?
Mm-hmm. In the back of my mind, I thought, well, when my youngest sons are twins. So when my youngest sons graduate from college, I can afford to take a risk, and my husband supported that. And the main, I think, initiative, or the main reason, I guess, is I had to drive an hour each way to get to my work. So 2 hours a day. Now and we don't live in Iowa because traffic is bad. I'm driving 100 miles a day. And I was in a carpool. I was in several carpools over the 30 years. But, all of a sudden I thought, I can't get those 2 hours back. Those 2 hours, all of a sudden I started thinking, what else could I do with those 2 hours if I were not driving? And that just really became very clear to me. I want to get more involved in the community, but I can't because I work out of town. I want to do more writing, but I can't because I'm driving a carpool, most days or some days. So it just became very clear to me that if I want to do what I think I want to do, I have to make a change in my job. And so then I basically retired from my college job, but I retired early, where my colleagues are like, you're doing what? You're too young. You're too young to leave this. And I'm like, no, I want to leave it while I'm young enough to still do something else. And so that was kind of my motivation.
Which, as you recognize, is a very big deal, Jann, right? Like, it wasn't like you were teaching even for a decade. It was from the time you left school almost, you were teaching, and it was your identity.
That's right. And you and I both know how hard it is to let go of your identity. And so I basically spent the last 5 years of my teaching career, letting go. Now, I didn't tell anybody I was doing that, but I was really practicing what I had been learning through my research about aging and saging. So I was really putting into practice what I really wanted to focus on when I left. And I think it takes about 5 years. Some advice I give to people is, while you're still employed and you have a paycheck, start exploring, start discovering. Don't wait until you're done. Try to do it while you're still, getting a paycheck, so that you feel like you have some freedom to, join some organization. I joined an executive women's group in Des Moines. So that gave me like an anchor. It gave me a network. It gave me peers. It gave me friends. that, so I wasn't all alone when I let go of what I'd been doing for 30 years.
Jann, you said it sounded almost, when you thought about the wasting the 2 hours commuting, that something was already calling to you. Is that true? Did you have an idea?
True. It is true. And I did have an idea. I had a professional mentor, and he was with the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I met him at a professional conference. We stayed in touch. I wouldn't have any of my books, Laura, if he hadn't coached me. So he coached me. He gave me feedback. He gave me advice. He helped me learn the ropes. And I wouldn't have any of my books if he had not been my mentor. And he sent me the book called From Aging to Saging, A Revolutionary Approach to Growing Older. He sent me this book with a Post-it note in it saying, read this, then let's talk. Baby boomers are not going to know what to do with the rest of their lives. And I read the book and I was just captivated. And then he said, so he and I talked, and then he said, they have a certification. Why don't you go through their certification? And I said, well, do I really have to do that? I have a PhD. I read the book. He said, no, the certification will give you a network. You'll feel more like you're a part of them if you've kind of paid your dues. So I went through their certification process, which is much easier now because of technology than it was then. And I'm glad
You
I
had
did.
to be there live? What made it harder?
Well, they have an intern, like I had to do an internship of so many hours, videotape myself. Now you can do it on a phone. So I had to set up a video and a tripod and really kind of put on workshops, market these workshops so that I could get recordings and then send those recordings. Now we can just send it via computer. I had to mail these recordings, to my sponsor or mentor, and then she would give me feedback. Technology just makes it so much easier, So, but I went through all that. I paid my dues and it paid off. And I did learn a lot in the process. I met people. I do have a network, and I'm pretty connected with Saging International, which is the organization that is the certification. Yeah.
So you knew pretty early on that you wanted to research this time of life. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think it's because my mentor, Elmer said, Jann, this is going to be a huge area. I see it as baby boomers are going to need coaching. They're going to need help, how to navigate. We're living longer. We're healthier for the most part. And he said, they're going to need help. And I think you can really make this your niche. And I'm drawn to all of that. For instance, I listen to podcasts like Wiser Than Me, with, I think we talked about this in the class you and I met with Julia.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Louise Dreyfus, and so Wiser Than Me. I like to listen to Leslie Seymour. She has one called Reinventing You, or,
Right. Leslie Jane Seymour.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just drawn to this content. I'm just drawn. It's like a magnet. Like I can't get away from it.
And how has it helped you with your reinvention? Can you think of specific
Well,
ways?
I think definitely. The 5 years that I was letting go without really telling anyone, it just really helped me with that transition. I was able to interview William Bridges, who is kind of a classic, known for transitions. Before he died, I interviewed him twice for not the latest book, but the book Leading with Wisdom. And so learning all about that transition work then helped me make that transition. So I truly was practicing what I was reading and learning. And then I started integrating it into courses that I was teaching to undergrads. And, so I was integrating these concepts into those theories. And I developed a whole leadership course for undergraduates based on what I was learning that then became Leading with Wisdom book. So yeah, it definitely, basically, it just coached me so that I felt like I knew what to do. Rituals, so I kind of had rituals that I developed to let go of my full-time teaching job. Anyway.
share one. I love ritual. I'm a big believer in ritual.
Okay. All right. So I'll share one that I think, okay. So, and I talk about this in my Breadcrumb Legacy book, where I had a conference in Chicago and I happened to be president of this conference. And as president, they would pay for all my expenses. So I could fly. But I decided, no, I'm going to take what at the time was called the mega bus. So I can get there. I mean, basically, yes, you fly, but by the time I have to get to the airport and then get from the airport, I mean, this mega bus would drop me right off in front of my hotel in Chicago, downtown Chicago, where if I flew, then I have to figure out the train or I have to figure out, So I figured the time is about the same. And the bus was like nothing, cost $30 or something. So I wanted to take the bus because I wanted to do a project. And my project this was March. And I had permission from the dean or the provost. He knew that I was going to be done at the end of the year. But I said to him, I don't want to announce that I'm going to be leaving. I want to wait as long as possible because people just treat you like you're already dead. And that's why I want, if you say you're retiring, you have no value. You have no value. And I watched people treat our previous president who had retired the year before me. And people did. They just, here this is beloved college president. But because we were in a search and he'd said he was going to be gone, people just acted like he had no value. And it just broke my heart. And I think it broke his. So I didn't want to be treated like that. And so the provost said, look, you deserve it. Take as much time as you want. And we're not going to if you told people in January or you told people in April, we're not going to make any different, we're going to hire a 1-year temporary person while we do a search. So he said, you just decide. It's fine. So the project was, I took the faculty staff directory with me to Chicago on the bus. And one of my hobbies is I make postcards. And postcards, I make all variety. I use my photography for postcards. And I also make postcards, what I call quote postcards, out of some of my favorite quotes. And so I took a variety of postcards. During the 5-hour trip there and the 5-hour trip home, I wrote like 110 postcards. And I went through the faculty and staff directory, and anyone I wanted to thank or send them, and usually I was thanking them for something, okay, or showing some gratitude. But I never mentioned I'm leaving, okay? And then when I got back to the college, they have like, intra-office mail. So, I don't have to pay postage or anything. I just drop them in the mail for internal people. And out of 110, I only had like 2 people say, are you okay? Is everything okay? You're not ill or something. But 110, but most people, as I would see them, they'd say, oh, that was so nice. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Okay. And then a month later, it was announced that I was leaving. And then I had people say to me, oh, now I know where you're coming from. But I wanted to thank people without them knowing I was leaving. And that was kind of all part of my strategy. But it was a ritual because I think too many people, again, if I had waited until I was actually leaving, I may not have had the time. I may not have made the time. I might have felt differently, whatever. I wanted to do it. I just wanted to thank people for things that they have done for me, things like, an IT guy, if I had a problem showing some kind of DVD or something, I could call him and he'd come running over, And so just things that people had done in the cafeteria, you always make it easy so that, we don't have to wait in line forever, whatever. And so that was a ritual that it was very important for me to do. I wanted to have the time to do it. If I flew on an airplane, Laura, I wouldn't have done it. But I could spread out on this bus and I could, so that's just one example of a ritual that helped me let go. It helped me let go because I was able to say what I wanted to say to whomever I wanted to say it.
That is so beautiful, Jann. Thanks for sharing that. I'm curious. So do you now teach workshops on legacy leaving? Because again, as someone who deals with with families, I often think about facilitating discussions about legacy.
Yeah, I haven't since the book came out in January. So I wouldn't say I've done a workshop per se, but I've been weaving this research in to my whatever workshop I'm doing. Okay. I did do a keynote for 600 people in May. And much of this was the kind of the focus of the keynote. So it is something that I want to do and want to do more of. But whatever I'm doing, I'm always kind of weaving in what difference are you making? What impact are you having? How is, are you thinking about your influence as a leader on others? Are you thinking about that on a daily basis? Because I say if you think about breadcrumb legacy, it can be your true north, your guiding, your moral compass. It can be your guiding star, keeping you, front and center, keeping you in your lane.
So have you defined for yourself what your breadcrumb legacy is?
Well, I don't know if you define it, but I want to be thought of as honesty with kindness. I want to be thought of as somebody who, enjoyed people and relationships and worked hard to sustain those. I don't know if I would say define it, but I really try to think about, because the subtitle of my book is How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. So I often think about how do I want to be remembered? And then I try very hard to live that way. And no one's perfect. I mean, we make mistakes. We need to apologize. We need to maybe ask for forgiveness. But at least we're aware of what we're trying to do. And when we're not on that path, we can course correct.
I'm curious, as this transition has taken place in your life, one thing that's clear to me is your mission, as you just sort of, what role, if any, I know you're active in your church, what role has faith played?
That's an excellent question, Laura, because saging is a spiritual concept. Now, spiritual, not tied to any religion, really, okay? But spiritual in the sense of that you believe that, what you do affects others and that there is a higher power somewhere and that you do have a belief system in terms of what's right and what's wrong and a moral compass. Because saging is like I said, a spiritual concept of wanting to be a good person. How do you define that? And forgiveness is a big part of making amends. Forgiveness, that's a big part of saging, repairing relationships. I mean, all of that is really important in what we call saging work. So
it has played a role, spiritually.
It has played a role. Yeah, it has played a role for sure. And actually, in my last 2 leadership books, I do talk about compassion, empathy, forgiveness. Those are important concepts because people make mistakes in the workplace, and we can't hold grudges. We need to get over that if we're going to be fair.
So I guess I hear you taking all those attributes and putting them under the umbrella of spirituality, compassion.
I think so. That's a good way to put it.
So as we're getting towards the end of our conversation, I do like to get a sense of how your definition of success may have shifted over time. I came from such a money-oriented background, so it was a real redefinition of financial success. As an academic, maybe a different kind of redefinition.
Yeah, I think that's true because, I knew going in, like I said earlier, my first couple of years, it's like, oh, this is so much fun. I feel guilty having them pay me, okay? But I too have to pay my bills. So I think in the higher education world, success, I think, has a lot to do with respect. And I didn't have to publish, but I felt like it was very rewarding for me to do so, intrinsically rewarding, even though it was not easy. But I like the challenge. I kind of thrived on that. And I think success, for me, success was really trying to balance work and family, career and family, because we had 3 children. We had twins, so we had, one more than we even planned or thought. Okay?
Right.
So, I really thought teaching gave me basically 4 months off, 3 months in the summer and basically a month at holiday time at December. And so it was a really nice balance of being home, having flexibility. I didn't have to be there at 8. I didn't have to stay till 5, but it meant bringing work home, grading papers, prepping for class. But I think for me, success was being able to have a respectable career and still spend that much time with my sons.
So you did feel you were successful. And I'm curious, now that you're no longer in the academic world, how are you defining success?
I think for me now, success is freedom and flexibility. So if I have freedom and flexibility, so yes, I have a major consulting job that I'm working on now that kind of fell into my lap. It's challenging, but I enjoy it. And that's going to be for the year, I think. It's going to be ongoing coaching and working with leadership teams and leaders individually. But I have the freedom and flexibility of, I don't have to do this. I'm not driving 2 hours a day. And if I want to meet someone for coffee or lunch and I have I do it. I make relationships a priority. And so for me, success is freedom and flexibility.
And what I'm also hearing, Jann, is that you really are a person with deep relationships. Even the ritual you described of saying thank you to so many people, that other people and your relationships with them seem, first and foremost, like very important.
It is interesting because part of it is I am a relationship person anyway, but I just had a big college reunion last fall. I would run into different people and I would say, I'd say, now, who's your college roommate again? And he'd say, some guy, like one guy in particular, he said, oh, I roomed with so-and-so and we roomed together for 3 years. And I said, do you talk to him? Are you in touch? Oh, not really. And then he said, now, who was your roommate? And I told him, and he said, well, are you guys in touch? And I said, oh, we probably talk weekly. Weekly? Like what? Like I just talked to my college roommate today. And, and I have other friends like that too. You call different people for different reasons and different, I don't call everybody weekly, but I do make relationships a priority. And I think as we get older, it becomes even more important because some relationships, people move away, some people die. My husband just lost his best friend from high school or since high school, his best friend since high school. And we're going to that service in Michigan in 2 weeks. But people die, people get ill, people move away, and some relationships become unhealthy. Some people like middle age and beyond drink too much. Divorces happen, that disrupts friendships with couples. So things happen. And so I think it's important to cultivate and maintain the ones that are important and healthy to you, and then meet new people. Like the class you and I took together and we met each other. You and I were talking about Modern Elder Academy earlier. I met a woman there that I hope we stay in touch forever. So
I love that.
Yeah. That ongoing learning, I think, is really important. And that's how you meet people.
And as you've said, you need to be intentional, especially as you get older. You're not in the same classroom or dorm like you were in college. You're not thrown into relationships. As you get older, you have to be very thoughtful, perhaps even putting it on your to-do list. I try to do that, like text, reach out.
You are so right, because I say that our friendships are often front-end loaded. You meet friends through college, you meet friends through your kids, their school, their activity. Like my husband and myself, we were soccer parents for years.
Oh, wow.
And so some of these people I thought we'd stay in touch with forever. And some of them we have, but not most of them. And, here you travel to tournaments and you spend all this time together. So you really do have to be thoughtful on making sure that the people you really like and enjoy and are healthy, that you stay in touch with them. And then you need to find other ways to meet people, and online courses like you and I took and met each other. Those are really, because you're in a course because you're all interested in that topic. So again, kind of like-minded.
Yes. And then being sure to reach out like we're doing one-on-one.
Yes, that's true.
Because we all now see all these faces on a screen. That's very nice. But if you want to actually build a relationship, you need to then make time to get to know each other.
That's very true.
So, Jann, this has been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything else you feel like you'd like to share before we come to an end?
Well, I would just say that if I said anything interesting, you can learn more about me on my website, which is jannfreed.com, 2 N's and 2 E's. I'm active on LinkedIn, a little bit on Twitter, a little bit on Instagram, but LinkedIn is probably the best place. And my book, if you go to my website, if you're interested in my book, there's a 20% discount on the homepage on my website. And it takes longer than Amazon, but it's 20% less. And so I think that would, I want people to know about that. But besides that, I think I do a monthly newsletter, which is easy to read. And if they subscribe on my website, they would get the monthly newsletter and my monthly podcast where I interview people, as you mentioned earlier, called Becoming a Sage. And that would come right to your inbox. So, but no pressure, only if this topic interests you. So
thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, Jann.
Thank you too, Laura.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jann Freed, a leadership development and change management consultant with the Genysys Group. And I'd like to share some of the takeaways I got from our conversation. You can't get those 2 hours back. Jann enjoyed her 30-year career as a college professor, teaching business management and marketing courses, but the 2-hour commute was wearing on her. It suddenly became very clear that if she was going to do what she felt she was being called to do next, she needed to change her job. My second takeaway, give yourself time to retire from a profession that is an intrinsic part of your identity. Jann spent 5 years letting go of her teaching career. She had been studying aging and saging and learned that it takes about 5 years to transition emotionally. Jann says to start exploring and discovering while you're still employed and have a paycheck. My third takeaway, when making a big life transition, consider putting rituals in place to help let go. Jann decided to take the bus rather than fly to a conference in Chicago in order to accomplish her ritual project. She took the faculty directory of her college and during the 5-hour trip there and then back, she wrote about 110 postcards to those she wanted to thank without telling them that she was leaving. And my last takeaway, recognize the value of relationships. Jann makes a point of keeping in touch with friends, texting, and otherwise connecting. She notes that as we age, we really do have to be thoughtful and stay in touch with the people we really like and enjoy. And also make a point of finding ways to meet new people, perhaps through an online course, which is how Jann and I met. Are you enjoying this podcast? Please don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss next week's episode, and share it with a friend. If you love the show, a rating and a review would be so greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Making Change with Your Money. Certified financial planner Laura Rotter specializes in helping people just like you organize, clarify, and invest their money in order to support a life of purpose and meaning. Go to www.trueabundanceadvisors.com/workbook for a free resource to help you on your journey. Disclaimer, please remember that the information shared by this podcast does not constitute accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. It's for information purposes only. You should seek appropriate professional advice for your specific information.